Well, Dr. Izabella Wentz, it's a pleasure to have you here. Today, we're going to be talking all about adrenal fatigue, brain fog, burnout, and so much more. But before we get into it, what would you say are maybe some of the top signs that show your health is off and it might be related to stress?
So definitely things like brain fog, trouble waking up in the morning, feeling really sluggish when you do wake up, having fatigue throughout the day, being anxious, irritable, having that 3 p.m. crash, being sensitive to bright lights, having cravings for salt, being dependent on caffeine to get you going, and using wine or other alcohol at night to kind of wind down, just being able to like being kind of disconnected from the circadian rhythm. So you get no energy throughout the day, and in the evenings, you're wired but tired and you have a hard time falling asleep. You have unrefreshing sleep. Perhaps you're waking up throughout the night. These are some of the more common symptoms. And another one is when a person stands up quickly out of their chair, they might feel like they're about to faint. So they have a little bit of like that blush blood rushing out of their heads. And these are some of the more common symptoms that give me a clue that your stress response might be off.
Isabella, I don't know about you, but when you talk through all those symptoms, I feel like most people can relate to what you're saying, especially women. A lot of the symptoms you're talking about, the standing up and feeling dizzy, the feeling like wired and tired, not being able to sleep at night, the energy crashes. I'm feeling like this is a majority of people. Is that what you're thinking too?
I feel like it's super, super common. At the same time, it's not normal. Like, we're not supposed to be stuck in this stressed out survival state. We have the ability to be coming from a thriving state where our body is repairing itself, right? And when we have calm energy throughout the day and our brain's working, and when evening comes, we feel like we are ready to rest and we get good, refreshing sleep where our body can repair itself. So it's so, so common and prevalent, especially in the last few years, but it's not normal. It's definitely not normal.
Yeah. Could you share with us maybe your personal experience of discovering that you had adrenal dysfunction?
So it was many years ago, over a decade ago now, on my healing journey from Hashimoto's. I was a pharmacist. I still am a pharmacist. Like, that didn't go away or anything, right? I had about a decade of very strange symptoms, and some of them included chronic fatigue, and then it just kind of like got worse. I had irritable bowel syndrome, um, headaches. I had hair loss and acid reflux and anxiety, and it was like every other month I got some kind of a new symptom, and I would go to the doctor, and I would just get no answers. It was like, you're stressed out, you're just tired. Everybody's gaining weight, because you're just getting older. And I was like, 25, right? So finally somebody, I pushed for more testing to be done. And finally somebody diagnosed me with Hashimoto's, an autoimmune thyroid condition. And at that point I was like, okay, great. I'll get on the medications. They're going to be amazing. I'm a pharmacist. I love medications, right? But I was very disappointed in the meds, and they helped me feel a little bit better, but I still struggled. And so I was like, okay, what can I do? And so I got into like nutrition, and I got off of gluten and dairy. This was game changing for my digestive symptoms, but then I still had like that awful, awful all day fatigue, right? And somebody, like some integrative doctor, mentioned adrenal fatigue to me. And I was like, oh, okay, let me look that up. Never heard of it. Like, I'm a pharmacist, I should have heard of it, right? And then I look it up, and it's like, this isn't a real diagnosis. It's like, made up or whatever. I was like, okay, never mind. Finally, like, people kept bringing it up to me, and I was like, okay, 15th person said it. I guess I will do something about it. And sure enough, I researched it, and with a skeptical mind, of course, and I had all the symptoms, and then I tried the recommendations, and holy cow, I got better. So I was able to wake up in the morning with energy, and my brain fog was gone, and I was not anxious anymore. And I was like sleeping well and recovering. And I was like, oh, maybe this is a real thing. And I've been talking about it for the last decade as it relates to Hashimoto's and helping women with Hashimoto's address their adrenals. That's a big part of what I recommend for anybody with thyroid issues and autoimmune issues. And then 5 years ago, when I was a new mom, I got another situation with adrenal fatigue because of the sleep deprivation that anybody that's a mom will understand. That's one of the fastest ways to get into that adrenal dysfunction, fatigue, prolonged sleep deprivation, and some other stressful things going on in my life at the time. And then I came across another protocol, kind of a unique way to really help support energy, that calm and beautiful energy in the body, and to balance the stress response. And it worked really well in just a few weeks. And then I decided to put it out into the world and my community. And we've had over 3,000 women now go through the program with great results. So I'm like, okay, this works for people with thyroid issues. It can work for new moms. It can work for women who don't have thyroid issues, who just have like all of these symptoms that are so common in our modern times, right?
Exactly. And before I'm so excited to jump into your protocol, but before we go into that, I'd love for you to share, what are the adrenals? As someone who I don't have any thyroid issues, but I definitely have adrenal fatigue from my old life of just going hard in my career and pushing myself to no limits. But can you kind of share what the adrenals are and why it's important for us to really focus on it?
Mm-hmm. So our adrenals are these tiny little glands that sit on top of our kidneys, and they're responsible for producing most of our stress hormones, right? And typically we hear stress bad, ooh, right? And we hear about cortisol, which is the main stress hormone, that when you have high cortisol, this is quote unquote bad. And I agree. We don't want to have too much cortisol. We also don't want to have not enough cortisol, because cortisol does play an important immune balancing, inflammatory balancing role. It helps to build our energy throughout the day. And so what happens in a lot of people when they've been under stress, chronic stress for a prolonged period of time, their production of stress hormones is just, it's all over the place. It's not connected to the circadian rhythm, which normally healthy functioning people will have a little bit of cortisol release in the morning, and then that gradually decreases over the day. When you're in a stressed out state of chronic stress, you might be having too much cortisol throughout the day. You might have not enough cortisol throughout the day, or you might be on a cortisol roller coaster where you just have not enough cortisol in the mornings and too much in the evenings, where you're like, holy cow, when did I become a night owl, right?
Yeah.
So I want to talk about that concept of stress, because I think in our modern world, a lot of people can feel like, oh yeah, I have stress, especially through the pandemic and everything we've gone through. But stress is not just, the mental stress. There's also the physical stress of our body. So can adrenal fatigue, there might be somebody who's listening to this who's like, I have all those symptoms, but I'm not stressed. Like life is good. But the body can also be producing stress that we don't know about. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So definitely psychological stress is super relevant. And it's pretty recognizable, I think, for most people if they're presently under stress, right? There's also traumatic stress that may get stored in your body. And so you have unprocessed stress that something happened many, many years ago, but it's still kind of sticking with you. So typically people with like PTSD, they would be maybe perhaps a bit more aware of that, but this can happen to the average person as well, where their life is good right now, but they might have had something in their past that's kind of keeping them on edge. And then there's like the physical sources of stress. So things like driving yourself too hard. And so you're burning yourself out. You're burning the candle at both ends. You're overworking, you're undersleeping, you're over-exercising, you're under-eating. These can be very, very stressful on the body, right? This can be something that's, self-induced in some ways, right? Or perhaps we're very well-meaning and we're trying to lose weight. And so we're like, okay, let's eat less and exercise more. And that actually can be too stressful for our bodies, depending on what else is going on. And then there's like physiological sources of stress that we may not even be aware of. So if you're somebody that's exposed to toxins like mold, mycotoxins, these can be incredibly stressful on our system, right? And you can have a perfect life, eat a perfect diet, but if you're exposed to something super toxic like that, that could shift you in that stress response. And then there's like chronic infections like H. pylori, all kinds of hidden things that are causing inflammation within our body that can really deplete that cortisol. So cortisol gets released partially when the body senses a lot of inflammation. It's a natural anti-inflammatory. And when the body keeps pushing, asking for more cortisol, that's a stress signal, right? So definitely things that are hidden that can be problematic, foods that we're sensitive to, as well as not eating a blood sugar balanced diet. Something so simple as that can be just kind of overfill your stress cup and shift you into that survival mode rather than keep you in a thriving, my body's repairing itself and I feel good mode, right?
So what's the first step if somebody's listening and they can identify with everything that you're saying, they suspect that this is the case for them? What's the first step that they should take? Because there's probably so many steps and there's so many root causes to identify, but what's like one thing they can do now to just get the ball rolling?
One of the things that can be incredibly helpful for people is focusing on their nutrition. So making sure they're eating blood sugar balanced. And part of that is usually more fat and protein than people are used to eating and less carbs. This can be a big game changer. I know I've worked with so many women that have said, I thought I had anxiety. Turned out I was just getting hangry, right? Because I wasn't eating enough protein or I was skipping my meals, right? And sometimes when we're in that high cortisol state, we're in that stressed out state, we're not hungry. And we can kind of push ourselves past the limit. And then our body, we're kind of like, I'm not hungry now, but 6 hours later, 2 hours later, 4 hours later, our body will be like, no, this is not working for me, right?
I think Yasmin and I can both relate.
I'm like, are you guys talking about me during this whole interview?
I've been there, done that, right? I'm not just like an expert. I'm also like a client. So I know.
Yeah. I'm curious, and this is just probably from my own perspective because it resonates a lot. And I tell Kaya this all the time and Drew, like, I'm not hungry. My cue is not my hunger cues. I'll just feel off. So I know now that I know I'll force myself to eat 3 meals a day because my brain and my anxiety just feels way better. Like I feel calm and collected. I feel good, but those hunger cues are still not there. And I just think it's fascinating. Do you think it's still me trying to heal the old, like, cortisol spikes that I dealt with, adrenal fatigue? Like, how do I get over that hump if I'm not hungry in the morning? And a lot of women aren't hungry in the morning.
One of the things that I recommend doing is an adrenal kickstart smoothie. And this is half a cup of orange juice. This is going to be a little bit of protein. And to kind of damper the sugar effect of the orange juice is going to be rich in vitamin C, support your adrenals, raise your blood sugar a little bit. A lot of women that feel that way tend to not be hungry when they wake up. And then adding some coconut milk for fat and a little bit of electrolytes. And that's going to be a great way to like start your day. It's not like you have to eat a whole buffet, but it is a little bit of nourishment into your body and to kind of let your body know that it's morning time, right? And if you could do that while you're sipping, on your balcony or outside and the weather is beautiful and kind of having that opportunity to get some real natural light into your eyes, that's going to be a great way to balance your morning cortisol levels. So they're not too high, they're not too low at that point, and that you're you kind of like almost have to retrain your body to be hungry at the right times. And so you do that for a little while, where I have women, I know a lot of women will skip meals because they think like that's their path to losing weight. And unfortunately, it can have the opposite effect when we're in that stressed out state. And so we kind of we set a schedule, and then you kind of follow that, and you really work on realigning your body with the circadian rhythm. And then eventually, as the time goes on, within a few weeks, usually women will start being hungry again, in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evenings. And typically part of that is like the meal timing and also the circadian rhythm work.
Yeah, that actually sounds delicious.
It's yummy too, which doesn't hurt, right? Yeah. I'm like, I actually look forward to drinking it every day.
Sorry, Kay, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I was saying, Izabella, you were talking about reworking your circadian rhythm. And I know in another interview, and you mentioned it earlier, that you also thought you were a night owl. I thought I was a night owl as well, but there's so much that we can do to get our body into a better rhythm, circadian rhythm. So can you kind of talk about maybe what are some of the elements that can help support us get into a better rhythm with our bodies?
So absolutely. And the kind of bright lights in the morning time are critical. So when you first wake up in the morning, within 30 minutes, if you could step outside and let the sun kind of, shine on you and get some of that beautiful sunshine, that's going to help to tell your body that it's morning time, right? A lot of us spend so much time indoors that we don't even think about it, that it might not, if like maybe if you have a dog, you might be up at 5 a.m. walking that dog, or if you have a young child, you might be in the stroller at 5 a.m. with your young child. But a lot of us can be so disconnected from that. It's morning time. And the indoor lighting that we have just doesn't have enough of that light spectrum to really give our body like a very specific cue. I used to work with children and adults with developmental disabilities. And one of the challenges with individuals who had blindness and retinal blindness was that they weren't tuned into their circadian rhythm. Mm-hmm. And so they weren't, sleeping when everybody else was sleeping. And so part of like that cue is that sunshine. And so doing that can help. Eating most of your meals during daylight hours, as well as outside or close to like windows or close to sunshine if you can, take a nice lunch outside, right? Doing that. And then after dark, really focusing on winding down and trying to block out the blue lights, whether that is, you cut off technology after sunset, or you wear some blue blockers, you block out all the lights in your bedroom, so that you get kind of like the ancient cues of this is daytime and this is when we're supposed to have most of our energy, and this is nighttime and this is when we have low cortisol so we could produce melatonin and sleep properly. And it really does work. It was, things like that. I feel like my mom used to tell me stuff like that when I was, in my 20s, and I'm like, whatever.
Yeah.
I hate to say it. It really does work, right?
I was just saying, it sounds so simple, but this is something, my husband Drew takes all of this very seriously. And before I met him, I was a quote unquote night owl. And now I love to sleep. I'm going to bed between 9:30 and 10. I'm waking up. So just a testament to what you were saying, that it sounds simple, but could really shift your circadian rhythm, and you can become more tired and feel better in the morning. So it sounds so simple, but I love that. But I want to take now the interview in a different direction, and I'm curious to get your thoughts around how caffeine can potentially impact our stress response.
It's been really, really amazing. Over the last few years, I used to, in the past, kind of the traditional approach to healing the adrenals was like, you have to get off of the caffeine, right? Yeah. And that's the only way to heal. And that I've recommended that. I did that myself, and it worked well for some of my people. But I remember having a few clients that were like, I'm exhausted during the day. I'm waking up a lot at night. I have these headaches. I constantly have to go pee. And I was like, oh, you drink too much caffeine. Let's just quit the caffeine. And they're like, okay, I quit the caffeine, still tired. I'm still waking up at night. I still have headaches. And, now I'm like miserable. It's your fault, right? And so when I was a new mom, I kind of realized that for a lot of people, the caffeine isn't necessarily the cause of the problems, but it's kind of a mechanism, a coping strategy that they utilize when they're so exhausted. And same with like, drinking the wine at night. So caffeine helps to raise our cortisol levels, right? And so if you're somebody that's like crawling to your coffee machine first thing in the morning, like there's a chance that you have low cortisol. And if you're somebody that's like, oh my gosh, it's evening time and my mind is just racing like a race car, and you have to have that glass of wine, wine can help you lower that cortisol. And so this is a way that people self-medicate. Now, we have better ways to self-medicate, but a lot of times I will tell people, let's focus on building your energy levels in the morning before I ask you to like even think about quitting your caffeine, right? And so it can have a real impact on, like you drink too much caffeine, you can't sleep at night. You drink it too late in the day, you can't sleep at night. And then you're tired the next morning, so you have to drink more. And if you drink it too early in the morning, then your body doesn't have that opportunity to raise cortisol naturally. And so typically I'll say, okay, go outside first thing in the morning, do the adrenal kickstart drink. That'll raise your cortisol levels naturally. And then have some breakfast, get some calories into you, and then drink your coffee, right? You can still have your coffee, but maybe you move it a little bit, or maybe don't drink it after 3 p.m. I know personally, I used to be able to drink coffee or caffeine any time of day. I turned, like 38, and it was like at 3 p.m. I drink caffeine. I can't sleep. If I drink it at 2:59, I can sleep. So we kind of shrink that window initially for people, and then after a while, once they have more energy, they're sleeping well at night, then many of them can wean off.
You mentioned something earlier about salt cravings, and if that could be a clue that maybe there's some sort of adrenal dysfunction going on. So I'm curious, what's the connection between mineral deficiencies and adrenal fatigue?
Oh, that's such a great connection. So typically people with adrenal dysfunction, their electrolytes are going to be off. And this is something that gets very depleted during the stress response. And a lot of times they'll have that, like, I just ate a whole bag of chips syndrome. If you've ever noticed, you're kind of you're having a stressful day, and you kind of like the food you're eating, like you just need to add a little bit more salt to it, right? So this is, or you crave salty foods on stressful days. And this is very, very much a stress-driven process. And so the way to kind of help that is you go with it, right? So you support your body. Healthy levels of sea salt and sodium help to keep our blood pressure levels stable and healthy as well. Typically, people with like that adrenal dysfunction, they're trying to self-medicate and their body's craving things, right? So you're craving chocolate. That's usually a sign that you're magnesium deficient. This is a big, big thing that's depleted by the stress response. If you're craving salt, salty things, that's a big sign that you might be sodium deficient. And so, maybe don't eat a whole bag of chips, but perhaps consider doing something like water with some electrolytes or water with some sea salt and sip on that throughout the day.
I want to kind of go back to the alcohol conversation too, because we talked about caffeine, and then you were saying that there was some advice around like, hey, maybe have your coffee later in the day. But what about wine? Because pretty much everybody that we've been talking to in a study that I read this week is like, there are no benefits to even moderate drinking. Like, let's just be real. So how are you working with people who are like, I can't let go of that evening wine?
So initially we focus on giving them substitutions. So what are we doing to help you wind down without wine, right? And I give them things like Epsom salt baths. Sometimes, I will have the most stressful day when I've had a really tough day, whether it's like with work or family obligations, and I'm just like, oh, I'm achy and I'm tired and I'm stressed out. You get into an Epsom salt bath and you come out and you're like, my mind feels calm, my body feels calm, I'm ready to sleep. So I recommend doing those. And then I also have, like, if sometimes it's like the taste or the kind of ritual of it that might be something that you look forward to. So maybe taking a beautiful wine glass and pouring yourself some sparkling water or something in there, like with electrolytes, that's really tasty, or doing some relaxing teas in the evening. I actually have a whole section in the book about relaxing teas that you can utilize in the evenings to help you kind of unwind rather than depending on alcohol for that. Because alcohol just doesn't work so well. Then you like wake up in the middle of the night and it's not like, you think it's helping, but it actually in the long term, it kind of robs you of your restorative sleep.
100%. And I'm loving that people are now, it's not for everyone, but people who are wearing wearables are seeing now, oh, I thought alcohol was making me sleep, but actually my sleep is totally jacked up.
Yes. I did an experiment when I got when I got this continuous glucose monitor, and I was like, what's going to happen if I drink rosé all day? And I was just going like hypoglycemic, waking up multiple times at night. And I was like, in the name of science, I will try this and see what happens. I don't have a CGM anymore because I think I like to experiment too much, but it can be really incredibly helpful to see what are these things and that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Is it like, some people will say, I'm eating grains, and that's kind of setting off my blood sugar response. And then I end up really anxious, or, I thought my wine was helping me sleep, but it turns out that I'm waking up multiple times throughout the night And when you have an aura ring as well to kind of pair with that CGM, and then you can track down and be like, oh, my blood sugar was low at that time.
Gosh, absolutely. And I used to be the biggest wine drinker like ever. And now I can't even remember the last time I had a glass of wine, only because I noticed just how good I feel the next day. You know, I don't know if it's a function of age, but my sleep gets impacted. I feel brain fog, like everything we're talking about the day after I drink. So it's just, for me, it's not even worth it unless I'm out with friends and, it's a Saturday. Of course, there's an exception, but in terms of like weekly dosing, it's dropped significantly. And I feel so much better with that. But I know we're talking about sleep, and I feel like we don't talk enough about sleep. So I'd love to get your thoughts around the importance around sleep.
I mean, sleep, so from so many different angles. I mean, this is where our body restores and repairs itself, there where our brain repairs itself. And sleep deprivation has been tied to so many different disease processes, right? And I mean, we don't even have to look at research. We just have to look at how we feel if we don't get enough sleep, right? You're going to have cravings for foods. You're going to be irritable. You're probably going to be more anxious. You're not going to be as sharp as you once were, right? On a normal basis when you get your sleep. And so I think in the past, I used to think it was before children, I used to think it was like as simple as like, you just decide you want more sleep and you sleep more, right? Like just don't stay up late or just sleep in, right? And I know that can also be super, super tricky for people who have small children and that need to care for them at night. And then also for people who actually can't fall asleep or have trouble staying asleep or have frequent night wakings or wake up too early. So I cover a lot of like, not just you need to sleep in the book, but actually like what to do if you're having a hard time falling asleep, what to do if you're waking up in the middle of the night, kind of wired, what to do if you're waking up multiple times throughout the night. And I give people a lot of strategies and solutions for kind of like the common reasons, and then for some unique circumstances too.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about one of those unique circumstances, which you mentioned before, is that when you had your son, there was sleep deprivation. I went through that myself, and we did some form of gentle sleep training that worked wonders for our family. And I finally could reclaim my sleep, which was amazing. But I still feel like to this day, I'm recovering from that period of time. And so I'd love to talk about what are ways that moms, because I feel like the first maybe year is like survival mode. And you're like just trying to do everything that you can do. You can't really implement too many new health protocols or things into your life. You're just trying to figure it all out. And then the clouds clear and you're kind of like, okay, I want to get back to myself. So like, what is your advice for women at that stage who are like, okay, I'm 2 years out. I'm really tired. I'm recovering from all that. I have a little bit of time to think about myself. What do I do?
Oh, yes. That's such a great period to kind of start thinking about that and shift into more of a thriving state. And thinking through, pregnancy and breastfeeding and sleep deprivation, this is a really big stressor on the body. It's a really beautiful, positive, wonderful stressor, but it's still a stressor. So I focus on replenishing nutrients a lot. So things like that I cover in the adrenal transformation protocol. So we focus on the B vitamins, vitamin C, magnesium, electrolytes. These are going to be depleted when you're stressed out. I also focus on mitochondrial health and mitochondrial support. Carnitine and D-ribose are incredibly game-changing for some of the brain fog, like that new mommy brain kind of feeling, and the fatigue, to kind of help you recover and replenish your body a bit faster. I also focus on making sure, like if you are I have a special tired mommy section in the back of the book that has some extra kind of specific circumstances. So making sure you're getting your fish oils to help you repair, making sure that you're utilizing choline to help you repair your brain as well. Plenty of sunshine, plenty of time outside, focusing on things of that nature in nature to help kind of connect back with that circadian rhythm. And then also a lot of times new moms can be deficient in iron. And so the plan is iron rich. I don't recommend an iron supplement for anybody unless they've been tested. So I do have a list of tests to do, including ferritin, which is one of the more sensitive tests for iron deficiency. Because a lot of times, the postnatal depletions, we're going to see low levels of ferritin, and you lose so much blood when you're creating a new human, and you lose that blood when you're giving birth, and nursing also kind of takes that out of you. So making sure that you're replenishing yourself properly is a big part of that. And it takes, I would say, it takes about 3 to 4 years after having a baby to really come back to that optimal state. And I mean, you come back like smarter and more beautiful and more wise, but it does take time, right?
Yeah. That's so interesting that you said 3 to 4 years, because what happens within those 3 to 4 years, a lot of women get pregnant again, right? Yeah. So it's like we're adding even more on top of our bodies. But I love that your book has those recommendations, because I feel like new moms don't get specific advice for them. It's a lot of like, here's what, get better sleep, do this. And it's like, how can I do that if I'm a mom, right?
Oh, so yeah. It still kind of triggers me when I see people like talking about it, right? They're like, you should just get more sleep. And I'm like, for a few years, I wasn't able to get more sleep. And I came up with these other strategies to really support myself with energy production and healing my brain. And some of the adaptogens too, we didn't talk about, but some of them like reishi can be really great even for breastfeeding moms, or holy basil. Of course, I always like make sure you talk to your lactation consultants, talk to your midwife about that. But a lot of the adaptogens can help us recover from stress too. And they can be a wonderful healing journey.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about adaptogens, but for anybody who's listening who doesn't know what that is, can you explain what adaptogens are?
So they are this wonderful thing. It's a class of herbs that they help you deal with stress, whether you have, from kind of like a medical perspective, you can have cortisol that's too low. And if we were to give somebody medicine for that, we would give medicine to raise the cortisol. Or if their cortisol was too high, from a medical perspective, you would give them something to lower those levels. The beauty of like adaptogens, it's like whether your cortisol is too high or too low, they'll normalize it, right? So they can help you adapt to stress. And they've been studied for so many things, including like anxiety, depression, sleep issues. Some of them have galactagogue properties. So that's good to know for nursing moms. That might be a plus, that might be a minus, depending on what situation you're in. Some of them have benefits for libido. For example, maca shatavari. Those are ones if you're like, my libido is not quite there, these might be ones to look into. And I have a list of them that I love to utilize, and all of them have slightly different personalities. For a lot of people, rhodiola and ashwagandha are two that are kind of great to utilize. And then I love anything you can have as like a tea. So I love holy basil tea, tulsi tea, and then reishi can be drank as like an evening kind of hot chocolate mix too. So and people just say like, when I get on adaptogens, like everybody just becomes so much less annoying. And I'm like, yes, that's a sign that you're becoming more resilient, right?
Yes. Yeah. One of my favorites, I want to know what you think of it too, is Cortisol Manager. It's like my favorite supplement. I swear it's like the better form of Xanax or something. Anytime I tell people like, look into Cortisol Manager, they're like, I can fly. I have no stress. I'm like feeling good all day. So I'm all about the adaptogens.
Yeah. And there's like all kinds of different ones. There's also specific herbs that I talk about, like serine, that can lower your cortisol if it's too high. If you have low cortisol, you may not want to do that because that will lower you further. And then there's things like licorice that can actually raise your cortisol. And I don't mean like the red chewy things. It's like an herb, right? And I have a section in the book about that. If you typically, if you're somebody that has lower blood pressure, then that's a sign that you probably have low cortisol. And if you have high blood pressure, it's a sign that you have high cortisol. And so this might be a great way to kind of get the feedback from your body. It's like, oh, your blood pressure is kind of high. That's actually a sign that you might be, like having a cortisol spike, right?
Yeah, Izabella. And I know throughout this interview, you've talked about multiple aspects of your protocol. And I'd love to hear, I know from prepping a little bit from prior interviews, you modified and kind of reorganized the protocol. So I'd love to hear what was the impetus of that? And maybe at a high level, you can walk through what the protocol is. I know there's a lot of detail that your book goes into, which we'll definitely share in our show notes, but would love to hear kind of high level about that.
Sure. So I really focus on sending safety signals. So when we think about stress, it's like stress sets off a danger alarm in our bodies, and we have too much of these danger signals that our body shifts into that survival mode, right? It's like you got the sleep deprivation, you're worried about something, then there's inflammation from your body, you're skipping meals, and all of a sudden you find yourself in this like fight or flight survival mode. And so I really focus on sending safety signals. And so how do we send these safety signals? Part of that is through nutrition, eating anti-inflammatory foods that are nutrient dense, that are enough protein and fat and blood sugar balanced. You're going to feel amazing just by doing that. And then we replenish some of the nutrients that are going to be deficient. That's another safety signal. So some of the B's and C's and magnesium, electrolytes, mitochondrial support. Then the other things we focus on beyond nutrition is like connecting to the circadian rhythm, really focusing on creating joy in your life. So maybe like, I think this is one of the things that a lot of women that I've worked with, they have a hard time with it because they're like, I'm very overwhelmed. I've got so many things in my life that I'm doing. And you want me to like take 20 to 30 minutes to just do something for the fun of it. And I'm like, yes, I do want you to do that. Because that can very quickly shift us into that like thriving state, and going through creating opportunities for us to heal with just treating ourselves with a lot of love and kindness. So setting boundaries, sometimes I find like cutting out toxic people from your life can be even more beneficial than cutting out toxic foods, right? We all know that. And really working on building your resilience. So figuring out what type of exercise is the right fit for you. Like, do you feel better after your exercise? Yeah. Okay, great. That's the right medicine and the right dose. Do you feel worse after your exercise? You got either the wrong medicine or the wrong dose. We need to revisit something like that. And it's a comprehensive plan that really focuses on, kind of addressing all of the different sources of stress, even like some of the traumatic stress. I talk about strategies to deal with that, like creating a trigger toolkit so that if you are triggered by something traumatic that happened to you, you know what to do. You're not just reacting, and creating and giving people some really helpful tools to utilize on their healing journey.
Wow, this book sounds super comprehensive. So I'm excited to read it, and I'm excited for other people to read it. I'm also curious about your own journey with your hormones and kind of bringing back balance in your life. I believe that you used beeya at a certain point, or maybe still are. So I would love to hear more about that.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And thank you, ladies, for creating this incredible product. I had heard about seed cycling for quite some time. And, as a new mom, you're kind of like, one more thing that I have to do. I have to like buy these seeds and grind them up. And you guys have made it so easy to implement into my routine. I was nursing my son, so I did extended nursing almost 4 years. And towards like kind of 2020, when things got a little bit weird for everybody, I was worried a lot about my son and about the world. And my husband and I went to our home in Colorado, and my parents used to visit and help us out with our son. And I got into this kind of habit of like, it was just my husband and myself and our son and working. And I got in the habit of like skipping my breakfast and drinking, like crawling to the coffee machine, not really making that time for self-care. And really, my cortisol started going up. I had balanced it before. And I ended up with some really strange symptoms that I'd never had before. So I ended up with frequent menses. Every 2 weeks, I was getting my period and headaches and just feeling like I'm a super calm person. People are like, how are you always so calm? And I was like, not calm. Like I was like waking up, my son was sleeping better at the time, but I was still waking up wide awake, looking around, right? What's going on? And just super, super kind of disconnected from my body. And I wanted to try something that would help me regulate my hormones. I didn't want to take a lot of, like more pharmaceutical things because I was still nursing and I didn't want to necessarily pass anything in my breast milk. And I started utilizing, I reached out to you guys and I was like, oh my gosh, this looks amazing. Thank you so much for creating it. And I ended up like utilizing the seed cycling. And then I cut down some of the caffeine intake and started switching around how I was, I started eating my breakfast and smoothies again and incorporating some of these habits. And within like the first month, my periods came back to normal. So yay, they're normal again. But it was so scary. I was like bleeding every 2 weeks. And, a lot of the estrogen dominance can cause that from having too much caffeine, from being exposed to mold toxins, from potentially just, even breastfeeding for a prolonged period of time. And so I really want to thank you guys for being a part of my healing journey and for doing this for so many women and making this amazing protocol so accessible.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for sharing that, A, B, because you've helped so many people. I mean, I just remember years ago, I felt like you were the only one talking about thyroid issues when thyroid issues were becoming so prevalent for people, and Hashimoto's was like so many women had it. And I feel like they could turn to someone to like hear about their experience. So thank you for everything that you've done to help people and especially help women in this world. So we're super grateful for you.
Honestly, it's such an honor that you joined us today. I feel like, it was great to connect with you again. And just going off of what Kea was saying, my mom was dealing with Hashimoto's and you were just such a savior to her. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. And we're so excited about your new book. We're going to buy it for everyone. We're going to read it. We're going to share it with our audience. We can't wait. So thank you for taking the time today.
Thank you so much, ladies. It's been such an honor and a pleasure.